Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library, and I'm here to continue reading Witch Witch by Eva Ibbotson, published by Scholastic. We're going to pick up just after the majority of the witches have now done their trial. There was Mabel, who tried to summon a kraken and summoned a baby kraken. There's Ethel, who tried to put a family into 3 trees, only for one of the people to enjoy staying in the tree. And then one of the Shouter twins had her turn, and unfortunately the bottomless pit that she created, her sister went to the bottom of shortly thereafter. Mother Bloodwort also went and tried to change swans or princesses into swans, but changed herself into a coffee table. And now we have arrived at the time just before Madame Olympia's turn, the penultimate, second to last, witch to go. And so we'll start with chapter 12. On the night before Madame Olympia was due to do her trick, Terence had a dream. Not a dream, really, a nightmare. A truly horrible one, in which he was back at Sunnydon home with all the miseries and cruelties he knew so well. In his dream, Terence was looking for something terribly important, but he didn't know what it was, and growing more and more frantic, he ran through the drab, cold rooms, opening battered locker doors, tearing the lids off serving dishes with their soggy dumplings and clammy meatballs, snatching at the rough gray blankets from the iron beds, and all the time, as he searched, he heard the sound of laughter, jeering, taunting laughter. Unable to bear it, Terence ran down the mottled steps into the garden. "I'll find it," Terence said. "I'll find it here." He bent down and pressed his hands against the gravel, but the laughter was growing louder and more malevolent, and then suddenly rearing up in his path was the dreadful figure of Matron, with her sneering lips and baleful eyes. Matron, grown 10 feet tall, and still trailing the roots which had tethered her. Roots which he now saw were made of plated, blood-stained human teeth. "I must find it," sobbed the little boy. "You'll never find it! You'll never find it!" screamed Matron. And as her pointed shoe, sharpened to a saw blade, came to cut him in half, Terence woke up. At first, just finding that he was in his little room in the hall, wearing Mr. Ledbetter's pajama top and miles away from Matron, was tremendous relief. But the dream was one that it didn't seem so easy to shake off. What had he been looking for so desperately? What had the matron say that he would never find? And suddenly awake, Terence knew what he had not known when he was asleep. Rover. It was Rover that he had been looking for. Only that was silly. Rover was in his box. Terence had said goodnight to him only an hour ago, and he'd been in splendid shape, rippling along the rim of the wash basin like an anaconda. Still, just to make absolutely sure. Jumping out of bed, Terence turned on the light and went over to Rover's box, which stood where it always stood, under the window. He lifted the lid. "Rover?" he called. The worm was underground. He usually was, and turning the moist, crumbly earth over with his hands, Terence began to search for his friend. He was a long way down, and gradually, as he searched, Terence's moves became faster, and his breath seemed to stick in his throat. Even then, he didn't panic, but went to fetch a newspaper from the pantry, and spreading the sheets out on the floor, upended Rover's box. In the thinly spread scattering of earth, the truth could no longer be denied. Rover was gone. An hour later, the ogre, the secretary, and Terence were in Mr. Ledbetter's room, desperately deciding on what to do. The ogre had rubbed his eye patch onto the back of his head. Mr. Ledbetter was pacing the floor, and Terence, still in the secretary's pajama top, was crouched on the bed like a worried fledgling on a nest. "I suppose it wouldn't be possible to use another earthworm for the competition," said Mr. Ledbetter, coming to rest for a moment. Terence shook his head. "Belladonna said that she'd tried being black sometimes with other worms when I was up in the hall, and it didn't work at all. It isn't any worm that makes her go black, it's Rover." "If we got another worm and told her it was Rover," began Mr. Ledbetter, and broke off because he knew he was being silly. Belladonna could tell each ladybird from all of its fellow, call a dozen grimy sparrows onto a rooftop by their names. It was a foolish idea to think that all dogs looked alike. It was as foolish an idea to think that all dogs looked alike as it was to imagine that she couldn't tell Rover from every other earthworm in the world. "It's only Friday," said Terence in a rather shaky voice. To him, Rover had not just been a powerful familiar. Terence had lost a dear and valued friend. "It's Madame Olympia's turn tomorrow, and Sunday's a free day, isn't it? So by the time that Belladonna does her trick on Monday night, don't you think Rover might be—" He gulped and pulled himself right. "Might be found?" The ogre and Mr. Ledbetter exchanged glances. Terence believed that Rover was simply lost, and they thought it was better that he went on thinking that. They had their own suspicions, but the boy had quite enough to bear. "I wouldn't bank on it, son," said Lester, laying his enormous hand on Terence's shoulder. "I suppose we'll just have to give up all hope of Belladonna winning," said the secretary wearily. "No!" Terence had jumped up from the bed, and his voice was strong again. "No, we mustn't give in. Look, Belladonna's just got to win the actual competition, hasn't she? I mean, once Aramin's seen her, he's bound to want to marry her, and by that time maybe Rover will have turned up, so can't we fake her trick? Pretend to have raised Sir Simon?" "Get someone to impersonate the ghost, do you mean?" "That's right," said Terence eagerly. "There could be a lot of smoke and spotlights and things like that, like in a pantomime. And then this horrible specter suddenly appearing, alive." Mr. Ledbetter looked shocked. "That would be cheating, surely." Terence looked at him, surprised. "Well, cheating's black, isn't it? And blackness is what Aramin wants." Mr. Ledbetter saw the logic of all this. "But who could we get to take the part of Sir Simon?" "It ought to be a professional," said Lester. "An actor. I used to know someone I was in the fair, but not now." "Wait a minute," said Mr. Ledbetter. Now he had gotten used to the idea of cheating, his brain was beginning to take over once again. "You know my sister Amelia, the one that's Terence's mother and didn't marry the swimming bath attendant?" The others nodded. "Well, she keeps a boarding house for theatricals in Todcaster. You know, actors and people connected with the stage in general. I wonder if she could find us someone to impersonate Sir Simon." "We'll have to move fast," said Lester. "There's only 2 days, and one of them is a Sunday. I don't really see how we can leave the old man with Madame Olympia due to her trick tomorrow." "And I can't either," said Mr. Ledbetter. "She's asked for some complicated stuff. Strobe lights and amplifiers and goodness knows what. Oh, dear." "I can go," said Terence. There was a pause. Terence had looked wonderfully better since he'd come to the hall, but he was still the smallest and skinniest boy imaginable. And Todcaster was 30 miles away. It meant a train and then a bus into the town. "Amelia'd look after you," said Mr. Ledbetter slowly, "but—" He was too polite to say that he didn't think that an actor or anyone else would take much notice of Terence. "Wait a minute," said the ogre. "I've got an idea. The old man's been making paper money, 5ers, 10ers, the lot. Says he's sick of pumping bags of gold around. I'll just go and take a look." He was back in a few moments with a large wallet crammed to the bursting with notes. "If you take these, you'll be all right," said Lester. "No one will care a stuff about what size you are when they see these. And remember, not a word to Belladonna. She's got to believe that she's really raising Sir Simon and that it's Rover she's touching inside his box. However nutty she is on Aramin, she'll never cheat to get him, and that's for sure." But one light still burned at Darkington. A single lamp. And then at last they went to bed to wait for dawn. But one light still burned at Darkington. A single lamp in the window of Madame Olympia's caravan where the enchantress sat gloating over something that she held in her cruel, rapacious fingers. Something moist and gentle, which, greedy as she was, she prized beyond any jewel. She had always been certain that she would win the competition, but now, no one could beat her now. Chapter 13. Belladonna woke on the morning of Madame Olympia's trick feeling worried and out of sorts. The bloodshot eyeballs in her sleeping bag had gone very pink and fragrant in the night, and she had a nasty feeling that they might be turning into the begonias she was so often troubled with. Then there was Mother Bloodwort, who'd been so upset by the budgery that not all of Belladonna's coaxing coaxing could get her to remember the undoing spell for being a coffee table, and Belladonna had to drag her into her own tent and just hope that she'd come around inside. And being Belladonna, she was worried about the flies. Were they all right inside of the coffee table? What did they think? But of course, she cooked breakfast for the others and took a cup of tea to Nancy Schouder, who was still laying on her camp bed in her vest and knickers, telling everyone that it didn't matter which chicken was which. And then she followed Mabel Rack and Ethel Feedbag up to the hall. When they reached the steps leading to the south terrace, she met Mr. Ledbetter and the ogre, who told her that Terence had gone into Todcaster to do some errands for Armin. "Oh dear," said Belladonna, "he'll miss Madame Olympia's trick, and he's so fond of magic." And feeling ridiculously miserable at the thought of spending the day without the little boy, she went to look for the other witches and find a hiding place from which to watch. Madame Olympia had chosen to do her trick in the underground vaults and cellars of Darkington Hall itself, a cold, dark, echoing warren of passages, which opened into a wide cave as big as several rooms, where in the olden days prisoners had been tortured to death or left to starve. No daylight ever reached this subterranean maze, and as Aramin strode to his place at the judge's table, holding the genie's bottle under his cloak against the cold, he shivered and pulled his collar up around his ears. But when witch number 6 strode into the cave, his mood changed, for here at last was a witch to be taken seriously. One moment they were sitting in a dark, gloomy cellar, the next the cave was aflame, with flashing lights that changed from sulphurous yellow to livid green and searing crimson, casting strange and flickering shadows on the walls. Next, the vault was filled with a pulsing, sobbing, shrieking sound, as the music of the groaning gizzards, amplified to screaming pitch, pierced the eardrums of the listeners with a song about greed and wretchedness and hate. Having thus set the stage, the enchantress walked over to the witch's table and bowed low. She was wearing the hood and gown that Aramin had insisted, but she did not look at all like Mother Bloodwort or Ethel Feedbag or Mabel Rack. In the secrecy of her caravan, the enchantress had sewn 1,000 jet-black sequins onto her gown, which now trembled and glittered on the light of the strobes, as did the rhinestones on the collar and lead of her sinister familiar. Witch number 6 was tall and carried herself like a queen, and she had looped her necklace of 93 molars, 57 incisors, and 11 wisdom teeth, so as to make a column of palest ivory around her throat. "The Symphony of Death, performed by a cast of 1,000, announced Madame Olympia. Aramin nodded. He did not understand a word, but it sounded good, and the witch's low, husky voice sent the most agreeable shiver up his spine. Madame Olympia stepped to the center of the cave. She then closed her eyes and raised not her wand, but a whip like no other in the world. Stolen from an accursed Egyptian tomb, its thongs were made of plaited skins of humans. Its lapis lazuli handle had been wrought by an ancient sorcerer so powerful that it meant death to even know his name. 3 times Madame Olympia laid the whip across the back of her aardvark, charging it with the evil beast's devilish power. Then she cracked the whip, and everybody gasped. A minute before, the cellar had been empty. Now from every nook and cranny, from the walls, the ceilings, the floor, from the very air itself, there came a tumbling and squeaking and clawing. 100, 200, 500, 1,000 huge gray rats. Not ordinary rats. Lurching, swollen, putrid-eyed rats with scabrous tails and bloated fleas clinging to their matted fur. Rats with death in their filmed, vicious, maddening, plague-bearing eyes. Belladonna, hiding behind a pillar, gasped with terror, turning to take Terence's hand and remembering that he was not there. The ogre said, "Core," and Aramin the Awful leaned forward intently in his seat. There were so many rats now that they could not all put their diseased and twisted feet on the ground, but walked on each other's faces, climbed on each other's back. And now Madame Olympia turned off the music of the groaning gizzards and adjusted the amplifier, so it was the squeaks and squeals and hideous scamperings of the rats, magnified beyond bearing, that filled the cave. Once more she flicked her whip. Now, unbelievably, each one of the deformed and frightful animals swelled and swelled, grew to twice its size, 3 times. Rats the size of large dogs now, so that the beasts' heavy scaly tails thumped like hawsers against the stones. And the fleas, those dreaded carriers of bubonic plague, fell off them, large as saucers. Smiling her cruel, complacent smile, the enchantress watched as the sickening monsters in their thousands filled the cave, pressing each other against the walls, stamping each other underfoot, their whiskers flicking like thongs into the oozing eyes and twitching limbs of their fellows. And still more rats appeared, layer upon layer of them, until the cave was filled, almost to the top, with the misshapen, screeching monsters. Only the ghoul was smiling now. The ogre, though the bravest of men, had pulled Mr. Letterbutter away to stand behind Araman, and the 3 witches, their differences forgotten, clung together, trembling. Again the enchantress cracked her whip. They saw that Madame Olympia had not come to the end of her devilry. For, even as they watched, the flesh, the hair, the skin, and the eyes of the giant rats began to pucker up and shrivel, and then vanish altogether, leaving the whole cellar packed with skeletons. You can see all of the rats. Eyeless, hairless, tailless, these were still rats, and on the walls their shadows reared and capered in grotesque and a frightful dance of death. It's very good, said Mr. Chatterjee inside his bottle, but he was shaking like a leaf, and Belladonna, almost fainting with disgust, could be glad at least that Terence was not there. Another crack of the whip, and lo, the giant rats were clothed in their own flesh again. Their gray fur returned, their rheumy eyes, their scabrous tails, but the most horrible part of the trick was still to come. For as they heard the last crack of the whip, all the rats were seized at the same moment with a passionate and uncontrollable desire for the taste of each other's flesh. It was a cannibalism run riot, cannibalism in its most ghastly form, as the rats sank their yellow teeth into the thighs and shoulders and cheeks, and slowly devoured each other, crunch by horrendous crunch. I can't bear it, said Belladonna beneath her breath. There were fewer rats now, and fewer, as more and more twitching bodies vanished into the maws of their fellows. Soon only 50 rats were left, then 20, then 5. And then 1, a single huge rat, sitting on its torn haunches in the middle of the floor, blood dripping from a wound in its side, and the still twitching tail of its neighbor vanishing down its gullet. And even then, it was not quite done. For now this last rat was seized with the most terrible madness of all, and gasping the onlookers saw it begin slowly and relentlessly to eat itself. Madame Olympia waited until the dripping jaws were hung in the air. Then she flicked her whip, the jaws vanished, and she turned to the judges and bowed. The symphony of death is complete, said Madame Olympia, and laughed. Chapter 14. Madame Olympia got 9 out of 10 for her Symphony of Death, as near full marks as could be. The ghoul loved her tricks, and though Mr. Chatterjee's teeth went on chattering for a long time inside his bottle, he too thought that she was very, very clever. Not even the nasty caliph in the Arabian Nights had done anything more horrible. Why did I only give her 9 out of 10? Araman asked himself that evening. Why not the full marks? Because it was he who held back. The other 2 had been willing to go whole hog and give her the last mark also. What had prevented him, he wondered? For certainly no witch could touch her for darkness. And the style, the flair, those strobe lights, that single rat left in the middle of the floor eating its own flesh. Standing there in his dressing gown, Araman remembered her low and evil laughter. Very attractive it was, really, and that proud toss of her head. No one could beat her, that was for sure. There was just one witch to go, and from what he'd heard, she was just a little slip of a thing, not to be taken seriously. No, witch number 6 would be Miss Cankerell, right? She had known her herself. That was a very fine show today, don't you think, Lester? He called to the ogre, who was running his bath. Mr. Lester came out of the bathroom, looking steamy and rather tired. Very fine, sir, he said, his voice expressionless. Those flickering lights and the skeletons and those giant fleas, I really liked them, didn't you? Very much, sir. Of course, some people would have thought that it wasn't necessary to make the rats actually, eat each other up like that. I mean, I myself have never gone in that much for that sort of thing. No, sir. But you couldn't have anything blacker. And she was quite good looking, I think. I didn't see any warts, did you? Or whiskers. I'm almost sure she wasn't wearing wellies. No, she wasn't wearing wellies, sir. I'm so very glad she's won. Well, she's sure to have. Very glad indeed. I think she'll make me an excellent wife. I shouldn't think that she'll get things to eat each other when we're married. They'll just be straightforward blighting and smiting. Wouldn't you say? Yes, sir. Your bath is ready. You're not very forthcoming tonight, Lester. What's the matter with you? I'm a little tired, sir. Are you? Well, I'll tell you what. Fetch Ledbetter's nephew, Terence. He can scrub my back for me. A nice boy. I'm fond of him. I'm afraid he isn't here, sir, said Lester after a short pause. He's gone to visit his mother. Has he? Dear me, that'd be Ledbetter's sister, I suppose. Pity. He'd have enjoyed today, I think, said the magician, undoing his dressing gown cord. Those were human teeth she was wearing around her neck? Undoubtedly, sir. Yes, I thought so. It's a new fashion, I suppose. I mean, one must keep up with the time. Araman took off his trousers and his socks and his shoes, and was just about to start on his underpants when the usual plashing sound was heard behind the wainscoting. Oh my God, said Lester, who was in no mood for Sir Simon. But before he could make his getaway, the wicked spook came wavering through the panel and thrust his pallid, guilty face at Araman. Hello, hello, said the magician, cheering up as always at the sight of his friend. I've great news for you. I found a truly black witch. Looks like a certain winner. The spectre stood in silence, his eye sockets dark and inscrutable. I know you aren't into marriage much, but you'll like her. Great style. She did this amazing trick where all these rats ate each other up. Of course, not for people with weak stomachs. Still silent, the spectre stood and plashed. Oh, blast you, said Araman, suddenly furious. Why don't you say something? The wizard was in his bath, and Lester, who'd finished scrubbing his back, was out in the corridor talking to Mr. Ledbetter, when a cry of anguish rent the air. Lester, come back! It's trying to get in with me! Take it away! Lester did not move. Aren't you going to go to him? Asked Mr. Ledbetter. Not likely. But it's the Kraken. It's trying to get in the bath with him. I know it's the Kraken. It always tries to get in the bath with him. But, began Mr. Ledbetter, as another despairing cry came from Araman. Look, said the ogre, rubbing his eye patch. Last night that bloke sent 7 princesses back to 7 different countries, and 3 of them blinking budgies, lame ducks, and penguins before he got to them. A month ago he brought down a ton of toads on the tax inspector's hatchback. What's to stop him from sending the Kraken back into the sea, or turning into an umbrella stand or something? You mean he likes being followed about, and so on. Likes it, said the ogre. He loves it, laps it up, can't get enough. You mark my words, if he marries and has a kid, he's going to be the biggest sucker in the world. Anyone calling that bloke daddy, and he's a goner. Devilry and wizardry or no. And they both fell silent. For the thought of Araman's marriage lay like a stone on their chest. Terence hadn't yet returned, and even if he managed to hire an actor, was there really any hope that they'd manage to deceive Araman? Will you stay on if he marries Madame Olympia? Said Mr. Ledbetter, who could hardly bring himself to say the enchantress's name. Lester shook his craggy head. Don't think I could, he said. Goodness knows it goes against the grain to leave the poor bloke, but she really gives me the creeps. I wouldn't put it past her to turn me into a bloomin' baboon and get me to nosh myself into in the bargain. It's the boy I'm worried about, said Mr. Ledbetter. If anything happens to Terence, Belladonna will never get over it. It won't, said the ogre. He might be gnat-sized, but he's got a head on his shoulders. That boy. Even now, I wouldn't put it past him to bring home the bacon. I do hope you're right, Lester, said the secretary, rubbing his aching tail. I do very much hope so. Lester was right. No harm had befallen Terence, and midday found him ringing the door of Amelia Ledbetter's terrace house on the outskirts of Todcaster. At first, when he'd seen the dreary houses in the mean streets of the town he'd been so unhappy in, Terence felt uneasy and afraid. Miss Ledbetter's boarding house was not far from the Sunnydon home, and when Terence thought of Matron and her bullying, it was as though the last exciting days at Darkington had never been. But then he remembered that he was there to help Belladonna, and not to worry about himself, and it was with renewed courage that he rang the bell. Miss Ledbetter might not have a tail, but she was a brisk and sensible woman, and when she'd read the note that her brother had written and given Terence a cup of tea and a tuna sandwich, she got down to business. Now, it says here that you want the actor to take part in a show up in the hall, right? Someone tall and used to costume work, is that right? Terence nodded. If he could be used to talking in that old-fashioned way, with haves and quothies and things like that. Shakespearean. Amelia Ledbetter nodded. Well, there's plenty of unemployed actors around. It's not a comic you want, then. It's a straight lead? Oh, yes. He plays a knight in armor. It's a very good part. Sort of a star part. And it's got to be someone who can keep a secret. Now, let's see. She leaned across and filled Terence's mug once more with scalding tea. There's Bert Danbury, but he's a boozer, and you can never trust a boozer. There's Dave Lillingsworth. He's down doing cat food adverts on the telly, but Dave would tell his life story to a brick. Wait a minute, I've got it. Yes, Monty Moon. He's a bit long on the tooth now, but with the right makeup, he'll pass. Monty hasn't worked for years, but he was at Stratford once. In fact, I'm not sure he didn't play the ghost in Hamlet. Terence was very excited. He sounds perfect, he said. An actor who'd actually gotten used to playing ghosts was more than he'd hoped for. So Amelia rang up Mr. Moon, who by good luck was at home and agreed to come round immediately. Monty Moon turned out to be a tall and pale and stooped man with a large balding head and a way of tucking his chin so that it didn't show any sags or wrinkles. When he saw Terence, he looked a little surprised and a little stuffy, but when he saw the wallet Terence had laid casually open on the table, he got a lot less stuffy at once. 5 minutes later, they were in deep conversation. Now I understand that I'm to play a wicked, wife-slaying specter who suddenly finds himself brought back to life. Is that correct? That's right. Now fill me in, dear boy, fill me in. I must get right inside this part. How many wives have I slain? What sort of armor do I wear? Am I blood-stained? So Terence told him everything that he could think about Sir Simon, and Mr. Moon wrote it all down in his little notebook. And he doesn't wear his helmet or anything, finished Terence. The top of him is clear, and so are his hands, so that he can beat his forehead with a plashing sound. Like this? Said Mr. Moon, bringing his arm around in a sweep and striking dramatically at his forehead. Well, yes, but it makes a softer noise, sort of sloshier. Don't worry, dear boy, I'll get it right on the night. Now, what about the sound effects? Anything special that you want when I appear? Howling dogs, tempests, crowing cockerels? Just say the word. They went on discussing things for another hour and deciding what Terence should get ready in the way of skulls and necromancy, incest, and so on. For, well, it had been all right for Belladonna to write nothing on her list when they had Rover. Now that her trick was going to be faked, the more props there were, the better. And when Mr. Moon heard that he was to get £500 now, and another 500 if he succeeded in convincing everybody that he really was Sir Simon brought back to life, he promised of his own accord to bring an electrician and a stage manager who had their own van and would help him set things up. You see, dear boy, it'll be a first-rate show. I always did my best work in costume parts. Now, just draw a little map for me and show me how we can get to the hall the night before and rig up 1 or 2 effects. A trapdoor would have been nice, but one can't have everything. And when they finished, Terence went to thank Miss Ledbetter. Returning to say goodbye to Mr. Moon, he found the actor standing in the middle of the room, bringing his arm in a sweep round to his forehead, practicing and practicing his plashing sound. And knowing that he'd found someone that took his work seriously, Terence went contentedly away. And that is where we're going to stop for today. We've been reading Witch by Eva Ibbotson, published by Scholastic, and we're very grateful to them for letting us read this book. I hope I'll see you tomorrow for another couple of chapters, and thanks for listening. I'm Sarah Mari. I'm from Portland Public Library.